Once upon a time, there lived a very proud and arrogant man whose name was Adan. He was so handsome that he believed that his handsomeness could get him any woman of his choice. Adan often gazed at his reflection in the mirror, marveling at his chiseled features and flawless skin. He slept with so many women and kept several relationships at the time, with no regard for the feelings of these women. Adan was known as a serial heartbreaker who played with the emotions of countless women, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts. Adan reveled in the power he held over these women, finding satisfaction in their tears and desperation. The women he left behind often warned others about him, but Aidan's charm and good looks made it difficult for his next targets to resist. Kayo was one woman who had been with him for over 10 years. Aidan had promised to marry her someday. He even went ahead to introduce himself to her family, providing assurances to her that one day she would be his wife. Ona, believing his every word, chased away all the men who came to ask for her hand in marriage. She remained single, hoping to be married to Aidan. But what she did not know was that Aidan had no plans of ever marrying her. He had made up his mind to marry a virgin woman, of which Ayo was not. In Adan's mind, Ayo was just a woman to pass the time with, someone who served his needs without deserving the commitment he falsely promised. For Aidan, the idea of settling down with Ona was laughable. Despite all her loyalty, sacrifices, and the years she had invested in him, he believed that marrying a virgin would guarantee her loyalty, purity, and devotion, values he lacked but deeply craved in a partner. What Aidan did not know was that life was about to take a dramatic turn. One day, Aidan announced to his friends that he was ready to get married. His friends, who were accustomed to his reckless ways, laughed in disbelief, but Aidan was dead serious. He began searching for a wife, a virgin woman who was untouched and innocent, a woman who would be worthy of his name and status in society. Adan was so sure of what he wanted. He could not risk ending up with a woman who was like himself. The phobia of being deceived or betrayed by a woman who shared his own unfaithful tendencies consumed him greatly, and Aidan was not willing to endure such a life. He decided to pivot on his current lifestyle, hoping to find his perfect bride. He cut off all communications with the women in his life, including Ayo, blocking her calls and avoiding her family. Aidan began to attend church services, believing that he could find virgins in church. He even joined the workforce in church and became actively involved in church activities, hoping to make a good impression. Among those who noticed him was Ola, a quiet, kind-hearted woman known for her modesty and strong faith in God. Ola was everything Adan had been looking for in a woman. She was a renowned virgin who was not only beautiful but virtuous and deeply rooted in the things of the spirit. Adan set his sight on her and began to pursue her with the same determination he had once used to chase his countless women. However, Ola was not easily swayed. She had heard of Adan's reputation and was skeptical of his sudden transformation. Aidan, on seeing her skepticism, put on the performance of his life. He portrayed himself as a changed man, deeply in love with God, and determined to build a future with a woman like her. He joined the church prayer group and spent 21 days praying on a mountain. During this time, he fasted so often that he began to lose so much weight. His determination to win Ola over became the talk of the entire church, and many admired his supposed transformation. However, Aidan struggled with his past life. He began to secretly visit his numerous women at night, whilst maintaining his image as a reformed man during the day. He was so confident in his ability to deceive everyone, not knowing that life had other plans for him. One evening, after a prayer meeting, Ola accepted his marriage proposal. Adan was so excited that he could barely contain his joy. He saw her acceptance as a victory, proof that he could outsmart everyone and have the perfect life that he always wanted, with a virgin wife who would remain loyal to him whilst he continued to live a double life. Ayo heard of the proposal and was so devastated. She had given Aidan 10 years of her life, only to find out from others that he was engaged to another woman, a woman he had paraded as virtuous and worthy whilst treating her like a disposable commodity. The betrayal cut deep, and the humiliation of being discarded so easily was unbearable for her. Determined to get answers, Ayo called Adan repeatedly and realized that he had blocked her number. She sent messages which all went unanswered. So one day, she decided to confront him directly at his home. When Aidan saw her at his doorstep, he sighed in frustration but allowed her inside. Ayo, trembling with anger and heartbreak, asked, "Why, Aidan, after everything we've been through, why would you do this to me? You promised to marry me. You even introduced yourself to my family." Adan, cold and dismissive, leaned back on his couch and smirked. In his tone, dripping with arrogance, he said, "Let's be honest. You were never wife material. You were convenient, that's all. Someone I could have fun with while I figure out my life." Ayo gasped, her eyes filled with tears. "After 10 years, after everything I gave up for you, I chased away good men because I believed in your lies." Adan shrugged nonchalantly. "That's your problem. You made your choices. I never put a gun to your head. Look, I need a wife who is pure, someone I can trust to give me loyal children. You don't fit the criteria. It's that simple." Gaio stared at him in disbelief. His words were like daggers, cutting deeper than she thought possible. "You think you're better than me? That you deserve purity when you've been with countless women? You're a hypocrite." Adan chuckled. "Call me whatever you like. At the end of the day, I'm the one getting married to a woman who meets my standards. And you, well, you're just a chapter I've closed." Ayo stood there shaking with rage. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had caused her. But instead she walked out, her heart heavy and her spirits broken. As the wedding day approached, Adan was on top of the world. He had everything he wanted: a beautiful, virtuous bride, the admiration of the church, and a spotless reputation. But what he did not realize was that his past was about to catch up with him. The wedding day finally arrived, and it was nothing short of grand. Adan, dressed in his finest suit, stood proudly at the altar as Ola walked down the aisle, radiating beauty and grace. Their wedding was a grand celebration, and Adan felt proud of himself for securing the woman he believed to be his perfect wife. The ceremony was flawless, and the couple exchanged vows in front of the congregation. Aidan promised to love and honor Ola, carefully deceiving everyone present who believed that their union was truly blessed by God. However, on the night of their wedding, Adan was confronted with the shocker of his life. He woke up in the middle of the night to find his wife, Ola, sleeping with her eyes wide open. Aidan froze as he stared at her in disbelief. His wife, Ola, lay still in bed, her eyes wide open, but completely unresponsive, like one in a trance. Adan felt a cold chill run down his spine. He couldn't understand what was happening. Was this some kind of medical condition? Or worse still, was she pretending? He thought to himself as he shook her gently, waking her up from her strange sleep. Ola, Adan whispered nervously. You were sleeping with your eyes wide open. Are you all right? He asked. Ola, who blinked a few times, her expression calm and peaceful, said softly, Oh, it happens sometimes. She sat up in bed, acting as though it was normal. Adan could not help but feel terrified. However, seeing how calm she was, he decided not to dwell too much on it. As the days went by, Aidan gradually returned to his normal life. He stopped going to church and even began to visit his numerous women without fear. Adan was not worried about hiding anymore, knowing that he had a decent wife at home while he went about frolicking with other women. His wife Ola remained at home, worried about his whereabouts. One night, whilst Adan was out with a certain woman, he slumped on the floor unconscious. The woman panicked and screamed for help, drawing the attention of people nearby. Adan was rushed to the hospital, where the doctors conducted several tests but found nothing physically wrong with him. To everyone's astonishment, he woke up hours later, confused but unharmed. The incident shook him, but he quickly brushed it off as exhaustion. Determined not to let the strange event stop him, Aidan resumed his escapades. However, the next time he was with another woman, the same thing happened. He slumped to the floor, unconscious again. This time, it took longer for him to wake up, and the woman he was with fled in fear, leaving him to fend for himself. Aidan began to notice a pattern. Every time he was with another woman, his body would betray him, leaving him humiliated and vulnerable. The occurrences became so frequent that Aidan began to feel extremely terrified. He avoided going out with other women, fearing what would happen if he did. However, his arrogance made it difficult for him to change. He convinced himself that it was all a coincidence and decided to test his luck one more time. This time, he secretly met with a former lover of his, determined to prove to himself that he was still in control. As they sat together in their hotel room, Adan felt a sudden wave of dizziness. Before he could make sense of it, he slumped to the ground, unconscious, and woke up a few hours later to find himself alone, drenched in his own sweat. Adan was so petrified he consulted his friends, who were all shocked to hear what was happening. They pondered on what could be the cause, and one of his friends, Tan, reminded him of Ona's words. It hit Adan like a ton of bricks. He hadn't thought about Ona in months, dismissing her as a closed chapter of his life. But now her name brought a chilling realization. Could she be behind all of this? He couldn't shake the memory of her last words. You think you're better than me. You'll never escape the pain you caused me. Aidan, now desperate, reached out to every spiritualist and doctor he could find, but no one could give him a clear answer. Every time he tried to explain his condition, people looked at him confused, dismissing his experiences as stress or guilt. But Aidan knew better. This was no coincidence. He began to look for Ona. He searched everywhere for her, and even visited her house. But Ona was nowhere to be found. All her phone numbers were unreachable. When Aidan made his way to her family house, he realized it was empty. This was so unusual, as no one knew their whereabouts. As the days went by, Aidan's condition worsened. He could barely be around any woman, and this troubled him greatly. His friend Tunde advised him to focus on his wife Ola, but Adan was hell-bent on finding a solution to his predicament. He could not stand the thought of being with only one woman and had to do something about it. He approached his friend Tan, who took him to a powerful prophetess. She cleansed him by the river to chase away all forms of evil from him. Adam believed that with this, his predicaments would be solved. After the cleansing, he felt a sense of unease. He had no idea if the cleansing had worked or not and decided to test it out for himself. As he left the house that morning, his wife Ola warned him about a terrible dream she had. She urged him to remain home, but Adan was hell-bent on satisfying his desires. He had to know if the strange incidents had stopped, so he ignored her warnings and rushed out of the house. On his way, Aidan came across an extremely beautiful woman walking along the road. Her beauty was so captivating, and Adan could not resist. He pulled his car over and offered her a ride. The woman smiled politely and accepted, stepping into the car. As they drove, Adan tried to start a conversation, his usual charm in full effect. The woman introduced herself as Ada. Her voice was soft, but her words carried an unsettling weight. "You seem like a man who enjoys the company of women," she said, glancing at him. Adan chuckled. "Well, I do enjoy good company, and you, Ada, are beautiful company. I would like to spend some time with you," he said to Ada, who smiled and agreed. The two drove to a nearby hotel, and Adan took Ada into one of the rooms. As he approached her, Adan realized that nothing had happened. Feeling so powerful, he went in for a hug and realized that nothing still happened. Aidan was so delighted to see that he didn't slump to the ground. He quickly went in for a kiss and felt an intense heat overshadow his entire body. His entire body stiffened as his heart raced through his chest. Adan collapsed to the floor, but this time he was still conscious. He watched as Ada transformed into a very terrifying snake before his eyes. Adan tried to scream, but no words came out. He lay there motionless as the snake began to approach. Adan could see his life flash before his eyes. He had never felt so helpless in his entire life. He thought his end had come as the snake coiled itself around him, tightening its grip with every passing second. Adan wished someone would save him, as he felt his life drain with each passing minute. In that moment, the hotel room door swung open and Aidan's wife, Ola, who he never knew had trailed him to the hotel room, walked in. She caught sight of the snake and began to say some prayers as she watched the snake vanish before her eyes. Aidan, still on the floor, was trembling uncontrollably as his wife, Ola, began to pray for him. Adan lay there as his wife began to ask some weird questions that he never saw coming. "What did you do to Tund?" she asked. Adan froze to hear such a question from her. Adan sat there shocked as he remembered all that happened between Tunda and himself in the past. It all happened so many years ago when they were much younger, when Adan slept with the woman Tunde loved with all of his heart. He did this to prove to Tunde that no woman could resist his charm. It was all games to him, not knowing how hurt his friend was by his actions. For all these years, Tunde looked for a way to pay him back for what he did. He did a charm that made Adan collapse whenever he was with another woman. All the while, Adan blamed Ona for his predicament, not knowing that his friend, Tunda, was the one who was behind all the strange things that were happening to him. He never knew that his wife, Ola, had the gift of seeing things before they occurred. This was why she slept with her eyes wide open, and Aidan never knew that she was aware of all his escapades. Filled with so much terror, Aidan began to plead for forgiveness. He admitted all his wrongs to her as he apologized for all that he had done, promising to change. The next morning, Adan approached Tunda and apologized for what he did. He knew how hurt Tunda was and believed that no amount of apology would be enough to heal the hurt that he had caused. Tundi looked at Adan, his face unreadable. Adan, he finally said, his voice calm but firm. You broke me. You broke away something precious to me, and for years I held on to that pain. I thought revenge would make me feel better, but it didn't. Aidan felt his heart break as tears poured down his face. Tunde, I was arrogant and foolish. I thought I was invincible. I see now that my actions hurt you deeply, and I'm truly sorry. Please forgive me. I want to make things right. Turned aside and placed a hand on Aidan's shoulder. Forgiveness is not easy, but I won't let hate consume me any longer. I forgive you, Aidan, but you need to truly change. Adan, in that moment, made up his mind to change. He saw the pain that he had caused to those around him and decided to lead a different life. With his wife, Ola, by his side, Adan began to rebuild his life. He cut ties with his past lifestyle and focused on becoming a better man. He returned to the church, not to impress anyone, but to seek true repentance and redemption. He spent time in prayer, asking God for forgiveness and strength to change. Ola, though hurt by his actions, supported him. She saw his sincerity and believed that with time he could become the man that he was meant to be. Together, they worked on their marriage, with Aidan vowing to remain faithful and dedicated. After so many years had gone by, Aidan finally met Ona again at the airport. She had relocated abroad with her family and was now married to a man who loved and cherished her. Adan apologized to her for all that he did, and Ona forgave him, seeing how life had smiled down on her and given her all that she ever wanted. That was how Aidan, the serial womanizer, became a faithful husband to his wife, who he never cheated on until the end of his days. The valuable lesson from this story is that our actions, whether good or bad, often come full circle. Pride, arrogance, and selfishness may bring temporary satisfaction, but they ultimately lead to regret and consequences. It's crucial to treat others with respect, sincerity, and kindness. Taking loyalty and love for granted can destroy relationships, while humility and accountability can pave the way for redemption. Always strive to be the best version of yourself, and remember that true happiness comes from living a life of integrity. Thank you for watching my channel. I hope this story inspires you to reflect and grow. Don't forget to explore more fascinating and thought-provoking videos on my channel. Stay tuned for more. Hannah was sitting on her bed, braiding her hair while humming a song from choir practice. Her small room was quiet, except for the soft sound of her humming. On her desk, her Bible was opened to Psalm 23 and a half finished notebook, lay beside it, its pages filled with scribbled prayers and song lyrics. A framed photograph of her family stood at the edge of the desk, the glass slightly dusty. It was her usual space to think, pray, and get away from all the expectations of being Reverend Caleb's daughter. She loved her father, but sometimes being the daughter of such a famous pastor felt like a heavy load. People were always watching her, whispering about how she dressed, how she walked, or even how she sang in church. The pastor's daughter has to be perfect, they said. Her dad, Reverend Caleb, wasn't just any pastor, he was the pastor. He was the pastor. His church was big and it kept getting bigger. People came from different towns claiming they got healed or found wealth just by attending his services. Hannah had grown up seeing the church grow from a small gathering in their backyard to a massive building with thousands of people. Hannah, are you still in there? Her mother's voice broke her thought. I'm coming, Mama, she shouted back quickly, tying her braids into a loose bun. She glanced at the small clock on her nightstand. It was nearly time for breakfast. As she hurried to the dining table, she could see her father sitting at the head, flipping through some papers. His glasses sat on the edge of his nose, and his forehead was creased like he was deep in thought. A steaming cup of tea sat untouched beside him, the faint aroma of ginger wafting through the air. Morning, Papa, she said, sitting down carefully. Morning, he muttered, barely looking up from his papers. Her father had been like this a lot lately, distant, busy, and a little different. She noticed how tired he looked, the faint shadows under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. Later that day, Hannah stood in the middle of the church arranging songbooks for choir practice. The big hall felt empty, without the crowd, but she liked it this way, peaceful and quiet. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting colorful patterns on the polished wooden pews. She glanced at the altar where her father preached every Sunday. It looked the same as always, but the messages he shared from there had started to feel different. When she was younger, her dad would talk about God's love, forgiveness, and living a holy life. But now most of his sermons were about riches. God wants to make you rich, he would say. Sow a seed today and watch your life change forever. Hannah wasn't sure how to feel about it. She believed in giving to God, but it felt like the focus had shifted from faith to money. And it wasn't just the sermons. Everything around the church seemed to be changing. More people were coming, but it wasn't just the regular crowd anymore. There were men in expensive suits and flashy cars, women in designer dresses, and even some politicians. A sleek black car was often parked near the entrance, its tinted windows adding an air of mystery to the visitors. Do you notice how different it feels these days? She asked her best friend Leela during choir practice. What do you mean? Leela said, adjusting her microphone. The church. It's like it's not about God anymore, Hannah said softly. Leela shrugged. As long as miracles are happening, who cares? The church growth was unbelievable. People claimed their lives were transformed after attending Reverend Caleb's prayers. One man, David, testified about how he was once struggling to pay rent. Reverend Caleb told me to fast for 3 days and sow a seed of 50,000 naira. That same week, I got a contract worth millions. He announced during a service, raising his hands in praise. The congregation clapped and shouted hallelujah. Another woman, Mrs. Rebecca, shared how she had been praying for a child for years. After Reverend gave me a special prayer and anointing oil, I conceived, she said, holding her baby up for everyone to see. Hannah clapped too, But something about these testimonies made her uneasy. She had grown up in the church, and this wasn't how it used to be. Her father now spoke about God as if he was some sort of businessman. Invest in God, and he will pay you back. Then came the night vigil that changed everything. The night vigil was announced as a life-changing encounter. People came in droves, filling the church until there was barely any space to sit. The air was heavy with anticipation, and the choir's voices echoed powerfully through the hall. Hannah was excited at first. She loved singing during vigils, and the atmosphere was always electric. That night, her father preached with more energy than ever before. He declared breakthroughs, financial blessings, and miracles. If you want your life to change, sow a dangerous seed tonight, he shouted. People rushed forward, placing money checks and even car keys on the altar. The service ended around 2 a.m., but Hannah stayed back to help pack up. The scent of burnt candles lingered in the air as she moved around the stage. As she was putting away the microphones, she saw her father gathering a small group of people near the pulpit. He whispered something to them, and they all followed him into a private room behind the altar. Hannah's heart raced. Why was her father holding secret meetings after such a powerful service? Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to follow. She tiptoed down the hallway, her slippers barely making a sound on the tiled floor, and stopped outside the door. The voices inside were low, but she could hear them clearly. Do you have everything we need? Her father's voice asked. Yes, Reverend, someone replied. Then came the sound of chanting deep, strange words Hannah had never heard before. It wasn't prayer. It was something else. Peeking through the crack in the door, Hannah froze. Inside the room, her father stood with a bowl in his hands. The liquid inside looked dark and thick, and he was dipping his fingers into it, marking the foreheads of the people around him. Candles flickered on the floor, casting shadows on the walls. Symbols were drawn on the ground, and the atmosphere felt heavy, almost choking. Hannah's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought they might hear it. Her hand gripped the doorframe as she leaned closer, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This was the secret room, a place no one, not even her mother, was allowed to enter. Growing up, she had heard her father talk about it in harsh tones. It was said to be a private prayer room where only the most trusted members of the church leadership gathered for special spiritual matters. Whenever her father disappeared into the room, her mother would say, "Leave him, Hannah. That place is where your father hears from God." But this didn't look like anything holy. This didn't look like anything holy. The people gathered inside were praying not the way she understood prayer. They were chanting, their voices low and rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Her father stood at the center. He held a bowl filled with something thick and dark, and one by one, he marked the foreheads of the others in the room. "By this blood, you will prosper," her father said, his voice steady and firm. "By this blood we will prosper," they repeated, bowing their heads. Hannah's hand trembled. What is this? She thought. This wasn't the father she knew. The man leading this ritual felt like a stranger. She stayed frozen, unable to move until one of the men inside turned slightly, almost looking toward the door. Hannah ducked her back, pressed against the wall. Her breathing was shallow and her mind raced. The faint smell of burning candles mixed with something metallic filled the air, and the muffled chants seemed to grow louder in her ears. The chanting continued, And Hannah realized this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It couldn't be. The sudden wealth of so many church members, the rapid growth of the congregation, the constant focus on money, it all made sense now. This wasn't prayer for God's blessing. These were rituals for power and wealth, and her father was at the center of it all. She thought about all the people in the congregation, the widows who gave their last coins, the young men struggling to make ends, meet the families hoping for miracles. They trusted her father. They believed in him. But behind closed doors, he was using their faith for something dark and evil. Hannah's legs felt weak as she stumbled away from the door. Her palm brushed against the cold, rough surface of the hallway wall as she steadied herself. She needed to leave before they caught her. Quietly, she hurried down the hallway, her heart still racing. The dim light from a flickering bulb overhead cast long shadows on the walls, making her feel like someone was following her. By the time she reached the main church hall, it was empty and dark, except for the dim glow of the altar light. She sank into a pew trying to catch her breath. Her hands clutched the edge of the wooden bench, the smooth surface grounding her in the moment. Tears streamed down her face as her mind replayed what she had just seen. What do I do now? She thought. She couldn't confront her father, not after seeing the power he wielded in that room. He wasn't just her father anymore. He was someone dangerous, someone she didn't recognize. But how could she keep this a secret? People needed to know the truth. At the same time, fear gripped her. If she exposed him, what would happen to her family, her mother, her younger brothers? The shame, the scandal, it would ruin them. And what if her father found out she knew? Would he hurt her? Hannah wiped her tears and stood up, her legs still shaking. The silence of the church amplified the sound of her footsteps as she walked out. She couldn't stay here, not tonight, maybe not ever again. That night, Hannah didn't sleep. She stayed in her room, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The soft ticking of her bedside clock was the only sound in the house. She thought about packing her things and leaving, but where would she go? How could she explain her sudden disappearance? At 3:00 a.m., she made up her mind. She couldn't stay in this house, not under the same roof as her father. If she stayed, she would either go mad with fear or be dragged into whatever evil he was doing. Quietly, she slipped out of bed and grabbed a small bag. She packed only the essentials, her Bible, some clothes, and a little money she had. Before leaving, she sat down at her desk and wrote a note to her mother. "Dear Mama, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. Please don't worry about me. I'll be safe. I can't explain everything now, but one day you will understand. Pray for me. I love you." She placed the note under her pillow and crept out of the house. The streets were dark and silent except for the occasional bark of a stray dog. A cool breeze brushed against her face as she walked, and the sound of her sandals on the pavement echoed softly. Hannah's feet moved quickly, her eyes darting around nervously. Every sound made her jump, but she didn't stop. As she walked, she whispered a prayer. "God, please guide me. I don't know where I'm going, but I need you more than ever." The next morning, her mother woke up and searched everywhere but couldn't find her daughter. The smell of breakfast still lingered in the kitchen as she called out Hannah's name, her voice tinged with panic. They did all they could, searched everywhere in the town, but Hannah was nowhere to be found. Luckily, she found the note Hannah left under her pillow. When she read the note, she was surprised and showed it to her husband. Reverend Caleb read through the note and wondered what she meant by saying they would soon understand why she left. He began to wonder if Hannah had seen anything. Reverend Caleb became suspicious, but all their efforts to find Hannah were abortive. Soon the church members noticed Hannah's absence in church. News began to fly. Some said she ran off with a man. Others said she was pregnant and had to hide. Hannah ran and ran, leaving behind her family. Hannah ran and ran, leaving behind her family, her hometown, and the church she had once loved. Her feet carried her far, but her mind couldn't escape the images of what she had seen in the forbidden room, the eerie chanting, the blood rituals, and worst of all, her father leading it all. It played over and over in her head like a bad dream. She found herself in a town she didn't recognize. It was quieter than home, and nobody here knew her name. The streets were lined with small shops, and the faint aroma of bread baking wafted from a nearby bakery. She rented a small room with the little money she had, keeping her head down as she tried to rebuild her life, but the truth followed her everywhere. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face. She remembered how he used to pray with her when she was little, how he taught her Bible verses and said, "Hannah, God's word is a light for our path." How could the same man be behind such darkness? Hannah stopped going to church for months. She avoided anything that reminded her of her father's church. No hymns, no sermons, no Bible studies. The betrayal cut too deep. At first, Hannah didn't even want to pray. "How could this happen, God?" she whispered, one night, tears soaking her pillow. "If my father, the man who taught me about you, could turn to evil, what does that mean for the rest of us? Is this faith even real?" The questions haunted her. She wondered if everything she'd believed was a lie, if all churches were like her father's, using God's name as a mask for power and wealth. Hannah avoided church for weeks, maybe months. Every time she thought about stepping into a place of worship, her chest tightened. It was hard to trust again after what she had seen. One night, as she sat in her small room, staring at her Bible on the table, she finally mustered the courage to open it. The dim light from a single bulb cast a soft glow on the worn pages. She hadn't touched it since she ran away. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the familiar pages, her eyes landing on a passage in 2 Timothy 4:3. "For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths." The words hit her like lightning. Her father's sermons flashed in her mind, all the promises of wealth, power, and success. He had stopped preaching about holiness and salvation a long time ago. The soft rustle of the pages comforted her as she read further, diving into the scriptures like a drowning person grasping for air. She stumbled upon Matthew 24:24, where Jesus warned, "For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect." Her heart sank. "God, is this what happened to my father?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the night. "He was once good. I saw it, but he turned into one of these false prophets you warned us about." Tears streamed down her face as she flipped to another verse, 2 Peter 11:3, which spoke of false teachers who would exploit people with lies for greed. It was all there written in the Word of God, long before she was born. This wasn't a new problem. It was a sign of the end times, just like the Bible said. For the first time since she left home, Hannah felt a small glimmer of hope. The rhythmic ticking of a small clock on her desk filled the silence as she realized that her father's actions didn't define her